Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that, of course, I would talk about the most recent interesting news and big news in that of the boxing world. And for those of you, of course, that have not heard the most recent news, Errol Spence Jr., who, of course, in my opinion and in many people's opinion, is one of the best fighters in the world overall in terms of boxing, one of the best fighters on the planet, and I have repeatedly ranked him within my top five pound for pound. He once again is going to be, at least apparently, according to certain sources, he's going to be in a very, very big fight against Keith one time Thurman. And the reason overall why this fight is so particularly interesting is not only because Keith one time Thurman that he still is one of the top welterweights in the world in my opinion, but of course at one point in time this fight was more than likely supposed to happen. But the reason why the fight did not happen is because it was very obvious, at least in my view, that Keith one time Thurman, that he was not very excited to take this fight. And I think he knew that Errol Spence was a hell of a lot more trouble than what at the moment he thought he was going to be worth. So now that Errol Spence Jr., of course, is the cream of the crop of the division, now overall that he is at the top of the division, of course, now Keith one time Thurman, he shows up like that one parent that wasn't there for 20 years, and then all of a sudden comes around when that one person overall is famous. That pretty much is the situation. Keith one time Thurman now, of course, wants his opportunity, of course, which Errol Spence Jr., he did not have to give Keith one time Thurman an opportunity, but this is going to be a very particularly interesting fight. And this is, before I really break down the fight and before I really talk about other things that I think about the fight, this is personally why I have Errol Spence Jr. very high on my pound for pound list. And I recently came out with the top 15 pound for pound list, and the reason why I wanted to talk about this specifically in the video is because I always have certain people that whenever it comes to certain fighters, especially a Terrence Bud Crawford or a Gervonta Tank Davis or a Naoya Inoue, I believe is how you pronounce his name, the Japanese monster, or whatever fighter that I may be talking about, there are certain people that may ask me, well, why would you say that this fighter is allegedly an A-grade fighter and why this fighter isn't? And I thought that in this video, I also would use this as a platform to explain, in my view, what a true A-grade fighter is. Because there's been a multitude of examples overall, at least within my comment section, where people, they've stated, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, or, this guy clearly is not an A-grade fighter, but this guy is. Well, let me explain to you, at least from my boxing perspective, what a true A-grade fighter means. What an A-grade fighter means, in my opinion, is that more than likely you could win fights at a multitude of weight divisions, and I'm talking about decently big fights, or at least overall against some of the top guys there. So if you take a look overall at someone like a Josh Taylor, now Josh Taylor overall at 140 pounds, he wouldn't beat someone like that of a Terrence Bud Crawford or an Errol Spence Jr., in my opinion. But if you put him in the ring with someone like a Danny Swift Garcia or a Sean Showtime Porter, two guys that at one point in time were two of the best welterweights in the world, never really the number one overall guy, but if you put Josh Taylor in there with some of those guys, he at least has a 50% chance, if not even a little bit more, to potentially beat those guys. So that's how you know Josh Taylor is a true A-grade fighter, because he's really talented within a multitude of weight divisions, and on top of that, when he's presented with other A-grade fights, he can potentially win at least half of those, or at least overall a decent amount of those fights. In my opinion, if you cannot win either, probably about two or three someone of 50-50 fights in your career, or overall debatable A-grade fights in your career, you're not an A-grade fighter. And that's why whenever I talk about certain fighters that Terrence Bud Crawford has fought, or overall that Gervonta Tank Davis has fought, or Naoya Inoue has fought, or overall some of the other fighters that I may mention on this channel, Jamel Charlo. That's why a lot of the time overall I may not have them as high on my pound for pound list as some other people. But there's a lot of people that may wonder, why do you have this fighter so high in the pound for pound list? Why overall do you say, this about Canelo Alvarez? Why do you have Tyson Fury so high in your pound for pound list? All this sort of stuff. Why are you disrespecting Terrence Bud Crawford? I'm not disrespecting any of these fighters. All I'm saying, all in all, is basically the truth about the situation. When you take a look at Terrence Bud Crawford's resume compared to Errol Spence Jr., we can take a look at it and we can say overall, we'll take a look at it. He defeated the undefeated Jose Benavidez. He defeated the undefeated Jeff Horn. He defeated the undefeated Aegis Kavalaskas. Those guys were, very decent contenders. But for those of us that truly know about boxing, None of those guys are ever really going to beat the elite. And that was already proven with Jose Benavidez and Aegis Velasquez, because Aegis Velasquez recently just got his ass kicked pretty much just as bad overall by Virgil Ortiz as what he did overall against Terrence Bud Crawford. So it is what it is. And of course, overall, Danny Garcia was able to completely embarrass Jose Benavidez. And I've already told people many, many times before that he was nothing greater than a lower B grade fighter. It just is what it is. Once again, if you're a fighter that is not that great within a multitude of weight divisions, or you cannot beat more than likely one of the top 3 to 5 guys in your own weight division, guess what? You're not an A grade fighter. It just is what it is, at least in a division to where it is truly talented. And that's why overall, once again, when you talk about overall certain other fighters overall like that, when I talk about Gervonta Tank Davis, certain people overall get after me a little bit. I had some people overall say, how can you say that Gervonta Tank Davis against, some of these guys like a Mario Barrios? Like Mario Barrios is always the main example. They always say overall, how come, you don't count the Mario Barrios fight as an A-grade fight? How come you don't count that? Because Mario Barrios was bigger than Gervonta Tank Davis. He was undefeated overall. He was a champion, blah, blah, blah. Well, Mario Barrios, in my opinion, never really was a champion. Because once again, if you're one of these guys, once again, that claim that Teofimo Lopez and George Kambosos were never the complete undisputed champion at 140 pounds, 135, and I would agree with you overall because they had the WBC franchise belt. Guess what? That regular title, all in all, that allegedly is a championship belt, that pretty much is just as useless as what a franchise belt is. Now, some people would debate that, but I do not count the regular title or interim titles as real championship titles. Because if you don't have one of the 4 official main belts, then in my view, you're not a legitimate champion. It just is what it is. That's just the way that I view it. That is the way that it is in my book. It just is what it is. All right, unless maybe you defeated such a high grade level fighter to get there. But in my view, I don't even think that I can go by those standards. Mario Barrios, and here's the question that I have to ask certain Gervonta Tank Davis fans, because one of the guy's points overall had to involve Keith Thurman, and he said that Mario Barrios, he fought Keith one time Thurman. How come overall you don't have Mario Barrios as an A-grade fighter? Well, sure, he fought Keith one time Thurman, but he got completely outclassed. It's also the same thing with Jose Benavidez overall against Terrence Bud Crawford and Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia pretty much outperformed Jose Benavidez pretty much the same way that Terrence Bud Crawford did. So obviously he's not that good of a fighter. It just is what it is. And then you overall take a look overall once again at, Mario Barrios. Let me ask you something. If you truly believe that he's an A-grade fighter, do you think overall that he actually had a chance against Josh Taylor, Jose Ramirez, Regis Prograis? Because if the answer is no to all those, which in my opinion it isn't, guess what? He's not truly an A-grade fighter. He's not truly an A-grade fighter. It just is what it is. And Mario Barrios is never really going to become a legitimate champion in a weight division to where it actually has decent multitudes of talent. It's just never going to happen. And then you have Jamel Charlo, who I also talk about. Now, of course, he was able to beat Brian Castano, however you pronounce his name. Now, that is a fighter that you can argue overall has a multitude of talents. That is a fighter that you can argue could be very dangerous in a multitude of weight divisions. But the other fighters like Tony Harrison, Erickson Lubin, overall, Jason Rosario, get out of here. Those are not fighters that are going to be major threats overall in super A-grade fights. Erickson Lubin has already proved that, not only in the Jamel Charlo fight, but also in the Fundura fight. Jason Rosario has already proved that. Yes, he got a very decent win over, J. Rock Williams, but then in his fight against Erickson Lubin, he was completely outclassed. Same against Jamel Charlo. And Tony Harrison, don't even get me started on his ass. All right, yes, he was able to beat Jamel Charlo, but he was not able to beat any of the other decent contenders in his career. Okay, so it is what it is. And now moving on to Mr. Naoya Inoue, all right, the Japanese monster. Now, you could maybe debate that Emmanuel Rodriguez, that he maybe was an A-grade level fighter at the time, but I do not believe, this is my opinion, I do not believe that any of the other fighters in his career, even if some of them being decent, I do not believe that Payano, I do not believe that Jamie McDonnell, I do not believe that a 37 and a 39-year-old Nonito Donaire, I do not believe that they can compare to the talent of someone like a Steven Fulton, for example, which apparently is the next big fight that apparently Mr. Naoya Inoue ends up wanting for his career. That's why I keep saying overall, and that's why he's number 9 on my pound for pound list, And certain people, once again, they get after me for that. And they say, oh, how could you say that? You must not know anything about boxing. He very clearly is above a certain amount of these fighters. Well, once again, I have to see it to believe it. Because do you know how many people once upon a time said that about Mike Tyson? Do you know how many, people once upon a time said that about someone like an Adrian Broner or overall certain other fighters? You never know a true fighter's complete skill set and overall how great they are until they step into the ring with actual competition. And when you talk about Jermell Charlo, Mr. Naoya Inoue, when you talk about overall Terrence Bud Crawford, when you talk about Gervonta Tank Davis, most of those fighters that I just mentioned, they've never really truly been in a fight that, in my opinion, I really took a look at it and said, okay, you know what? This is their Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin. This is their Sugar Ray Leonard versus Tommy Hearns. This is their Ali Frazier. This is their Kovalev Ward. This is their Calzaghe Hopkins. A lot of the times they haven't been in fights like that. I do not believe that Inoue has been in a fight like that. I don't think that Terrence Bud Crawford has been in a fight like that. I don't think on the note that Jermell Charlo, well, Charlo had his Castano fight when it came down to it, so I'll give him that. And then, of course, Gervonta Tank Davis, I don't believe that he's been in a fight like that either. So that is the reason overall why I rank things the way that I do. Overall, you can get after me all you want to, but at the end of the day, once again, I have logical conclusions for the reason why I rank things and why I say a certain fighter is A grade and why it is not. It just is what it is. You can disagree with me, but that's just the way that it is. All right? So it's whatever. And also talking about, certain other things, when it comes down to, once again, with Inoue and a couple of other fighters, when it comes down to, once again, I need to see him in the ring with Mr. Stephon Fulton, and also to talk about another fighter on my pound for pound list, and then we'll get back to this conversation about Spence versus Thurman. A lot of people overall, once again, they always ask me, why do you have Tyson Fury so high in your pound for pound list? Because how can you claim that this guy is an A-grade fighter and your logic is flawed and blah, blah, blah? Because Tyson Fury is one of the few people that has clearly defeated a top 5 pound for pound fighter on every single list overall when Vladimir Klitschko was ranked top 5 or at the very least top 10 pound for pound on every single list. Hadn't lost in 10 years, and over 10 years, I believe when it came down to it, was almost a complete unified champion of the heavyweight division. Fury went into that fight as the clear underdog. He was favored to get knocked out in that fight eventually in the latter rounds. And Fury went in there. He completely embarrassed Vladimir Klitschko, and he won the fight. Not only that, but then later on, he defeated Deontay Wilder, who would have never been top 10 in my opinion, but he would have been top 20 pound for pound, somewhere around there. And Fury was able to dominate him pretty much on 3 separate occasions. All right? How many fighters can say that they overall have won all the belts in their weight division at one point in time, that they dominated overall 2 clear A-grade fighters, at least 2 clear A-grade threats, that they defeated and embarrassed the top 5 pound for pound fighter, and they also embarrassed the top 20 pound for pound fighter. And on top of that, their skill set is very, very complete on both ends, both offensively and defensively. On top of that, their accomplishments is A-grade when it comes down to it, and they're undefeated. How many fighters can claim that? That's the reason why Tyson Fury, when it comes down to it, and some people disagree with me, they always say, well, yeah, Klitschko was 39 years old. Well, yes, but he was 39. But when it comes down to it, you can't compare when Klitschko was 39 and when Nonito Donaire was 39. I get certain people that try to compare that. You can't compare that whatsoever. Because when Nonito Donaire was 39 years old, he already had several losses in his career. Now, of course, he had a couple of decent wins overall coming into that second Inoue match. But Vladimir Klitschko was ranked on every list as a top 5 pound for pound fighter. So don't try to compare that, because if you try to compare that, what that really just says about you is that you don't have any real context. It just is what it is. All right? It's whatever. So once again, we have to know how to compare certain things and how to put certain things into context. But now just to go back to the conversation about Keith One-Time Thurman and Errol Spence Jr. I think that this is a great fight. I think on the note that it is a very great matchup, and I think it's going to be very particularly interesting. Once again, I'm not really 100% sure why it's happening at 154 pounds, but I think that it's another great name on Errol Spence's resume. And what I'll also say is this is once again going to put Errol Spence Jr., in my view at least, within greater leverage overall to probably be against Terrence Bud Crawford, at least in terms of getting a bigger chunk of the pie. And I know there's a lot of Terrence Bud Crawford fans out there that are saying that Errol Spence Jr. is allegedly avoiding Terrence Bud Crawford, but we'll see about that once again, because Terrence Bud Crawford, he could have had the opportunity to fight Danny Garcia, Sean Porter, and Keith one time Thurman. He could have had the opportunity to fight these guys years ago had he signed with the PBC, knowing overall damn well that Bob Arum is a clear negotiation stoppage overall between them and the PBC. Someone that clearly doesn't like Al Heyman, never has, never really wanted to deal with the PBC. So why would you not sign with the PBC where all the big boy welterweights are? Instead of using this bullshit excuse overall that Terrence Bud Crawford and his fanboys have been making about, oh, they don't want, they're using the other side of the street. Well, sometimes the other side of the street is a real valid excuse, especially when the promoter of the promotional company that you're signing doesn't like to deal with that promotional company whatsoever. So whose fault is it actually? And that's not me saying once again that Crawford is necessarily avoiding Errol Spence Jr. But what I am saying is this: if Terrence Bud Crawford is going to do this bullshit when it comes down to it of, oh, I want 50-50 or, I want this or that. Listen, what I'm going to say is this: with the amount of numbers that Errol Spence Jr. has got compared to Terrence Bud Crawford, because let's be real, every single overall pay-per-view that Terrence Bud Crawford has had, it's basically been a flop. It's been a complete colossal disaster. It just is what it is. Even against Sean Showtime Porter, I thought that fight was going to do at least $300K. It didn't even do, it did half of that. It did $150,000. That pretty much overall was even a failure, even with that very decent fight. And that clearly was the biggest fight in Terrence Bud Crawford's career. And with Terrence Bud Crawford, once again, he has no one else to blame but himself, whether he gets a 60-40 or a 70-30 split. And if Terrence Bud Crawford is truly serious about facing an Errol Spence Jr., he's going to have to accept that split. It just is what it is. Because Errol Spence Jr. clearly is the bigger star of the two. He has fought the better resume, and he's done way better work at the welterweight division. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. So once again, Errol Spence Jr. is going to have the advantage within his hands. And if Terrence Bud Crawford is serious about facing that of an Errol Spence Jr., he is going to have to accept most of the terms. That's just the way that it is. He is the B side in this. He can accept it. He cannot accept it. But Terrence Bud Crawford needs Errol Spence Jr. at this point, in my opinion, more than what Errol Spence needs him. So we'll see overall what happens. I mean, they both need each other to an equal, I'm not going to say an equal amount, but they both do need each other. So overall, it is going to be overall a very happy day when this fight allegedly gets signed, if it does, which I hope it does. But like I said, we'll see overall what happens with this Errol Spence versus Terrence Bud Crawford situation. Because I see certain people, of course, claiming that Spence is using this to duck Terrence Bud Crawford. I'm not really going to claim that because Errol Spence Jr. hasn't relinquished any titles. And speaking of that as well, apparently if Errol Spence Jr. does not sign against Terrence Bud Crawford with his unification match after this fight, or if it does not get signed, I heard from a multitude of sources that either he's going to be facing Jaron Boutsenis or he's going to be facing the winner of the Virgil Ortiz versus Staniosis fight. So that's going to be very interesting to see as well. So we'll see. But anyways, overall, once again, that's pretty much about it for this. But this is going to be a very particularly interesting fight because this is pretty much the only other fighter besides Terrence Bud Crawford in the welterweight division that Errol Spence Jr. has not fought of as of yet. And that's what really makes the fight so very particularly interesting. Because Keith one-time Thurman, in my view, he is still an A-grade fighter. Now, of course, he's been a little bit more inactive as of lately. Of course, he's been a little bit inactive on and off for the past several years. But it is what it is. But it's going to be very interesting. Because Keith one-time Thurman, I would say, he's probably the third best welterweight in the division, right behind Terrence Bud Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. So this is a great fight. I believe that more than likely it's going to be very successful on pay-per-view. And when I say very successful, I mean anywhere from 300 to 500,000 pay-per-view buys. I expect it to at least do that, but we'll see overall what happens. Probably about 250 to 300,000 at a minimum, 500K, maybe 600K at the most. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's pretty much my opinion about this situation. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm very excited to see this fight, and we'll see overall what happens. But that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.